and a very warm welcome to Bharata First. You're watching Big Picture with Rausan Pereira. Since you're here, I would like to thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, hit the bell icon and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our weekly newsletter to get some incisive content. The Bharata First team is running a daily quiz. The winner will get to interview me in a program called Hot Seat. Details are in the description of this video. There is a contribution link for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute to keep this content alive. A small step will go a long way in helping us. Now to our discussion. As the world transitions from the new world order established by leading powers in the late 1940s to a newer contemporary world order defined by diffused and decentralized networks of power, questions about its nature, scale, and description, or rather direction, loom large in the international community. Multiple perspectives and explanations characterize the paradigm of the current world order, and the answers to these questions remain inconclusive. In such a situation, what should India's role be? How do we cement our place under the prevailing circumstances? In Big Picture, I analyze the emerging world order. Joining me on the program today are Harshvi Pant, Head Strategic Studies, Observer Research Foundation, Vishnu Prakash, former ambassador, and Major General Dhruv Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of Big Picture. Ambassador, let me start the program with you. You know, there have been quite a few fault lines that have been exposed in the recent past. There have been quite a few things that have changed as well as far as foreign policy or the world is concerned. How would you look at, all these changes in the recent past?
Greetings, Frank. First of all, I'm not very sure whether the title is in order. When you say the emerging world order, I would like to substitute it by disorder. I think we are looking at an emerging world disorder. As far as I'm concerned, forget Asian century or Chinese century. We are looking at an era of uncertainties where the established geopolitical, geoeconomic order is under threat, the gravest threat it has ever seen. And we will hear 5 C's, C for Charlie, repeated, which will figure again and again in the matrix. The biggest C, or the capital C, will be China, contestation and conflict, the cyber domain, which will play a very important role, and climate change. So it will be an era where there will be lots of C's at play. And now in terms of the big ticket changes or imponderables would be the effort by the US to maintain its preeminence. How that will play out will be watched by everybody, will have a grave certain impact. China will be on an overdrive to create a China-centric regional order. And that will be something that will be opposed by everybody or most of the players. How effective would it be remains to be seen. Russia will continue to be an ally, reluctant ally of China to stay relevant. And Europe, which is aging, will be continue to play an ever diminishing role. So that is broadly how I see the world disorder unfolding. Now, specifically, Quad will be challenged and challenged pretty soon, as far as I can see it. In the next 5 years or so, China is going to stage a misadventure against Taiwan, and that will be a big watershed moment for the world. Whether Quad walks the talk, whether the US walks the talk remains to be seen. Finally, India. India is been on the takeoff stage for the last 3-4 decades, and I think this is a time of make or break. Lots of challenges. Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon in his forthcoming book says, and I quote, "The next few years may be more difficult than the last 3 decades of India-China relations. The more India rises, the more we must expect the balance to shift from cooperation to competition with China." So there will be lots of imponderables. lots of challenges, but this is going to be a opportunity for India to emerge as the third largest economy and play its rightful role in the Committee of Nations. Frank?
Absolutely. I think very well put there by the Ambassador General. Let me bring you in. There are clearly challenges, but there are also opportunities that come along with it as well. How do we capitalize on some of these opportunities? What should our strategy really be from an international policy point of view?
Frank, taking off from where Ambassador Vishnu Prakash has given his views, you see, I think for very long, India has been a continental nation. And our thought processes have also been driven by the threats which we perceive from the land. Now, this is actually a distortion of history because India has been a very powerful maritime country for a very, very long time. And it was only in the interim period of the last few centuries where we lost naval power that we were colonized. Now, I think what I'm seeing now is a shift back to the maritime domain. So India is increasingly seeing itself both as a continental power and as a maritime power. And the Indo-Pacific, the contestations which are taking place in the Indo-Pacific, and India's Sagar vision, which has been enunciated by the Prime Minister, is actually a reflection of the new maritime vision. So, having said that, what are our real challenges? I think one for India, in my view, the major problem will still remain our energy security. Now, why I'm not really talking about the internet, the border with China or with Pakistan as the major problem, is for a very fundamental reason. You see, we are dependent on our energy from outside India, right? Whether it is coming from America, a part of it, or from the Arab world, a major chunk of it. The problem is that any disruption to the energy supplies will finish what we call the Asian century. So I think that is our primary concern, which is one of the reasons for this focus on the Indo-Pacific. We have seen what happens when the energy security got disrupted when Aramco was attacked. So anything can happen as far as the Gulf is concerned. And if a war breaks out between Iran and the Saudis, for whatever reason, and it causes a disruption in the energy supplies, I think India will be impacted very severely. This is one threat. The second, of course, is the land borders. And in my own view, it is not a question of will there be a conflict between India and China. In my view, there will be a conflict. It will take place sometime in the future, right? The question is when. And in my view, that conflict will take place when China feels confident of winning the air war. If it feels confident of winning the air war, it will go in for a ground offensive. As of now, China doesn't have that conflict, and in all probability, it will lose. So if you are looking at India's security concerns, I think one, we must ensure air superiority over the Tibetan Plateau as a military power. Number two, we've got to have a very strong navy to preserve our security interests, especially in the Indian Ocean. Now, as part of the Quad, and when we are looking at the Indo-Pacific, we are looking at a much larger area. And Prime Minister Modi has very clearly enunciated his vision of what is our idea of the Indo-Pacific. It stretches from the shores of Africa to the shores of America. Now, that has been enunciated in very, very clear terms. Now, if that is the case, I think we would need that level of cooperation with the other countries to ensure security of these sea lanes. And finally, my last point on this, what India needs to do. I think ultimately the key is the economy. No power can grow without the appropriate level of economic growth. This is where our stress has to be. The Prime Minister has laid down a roadmap for a $5 trillion economy. And subsequently, when we were discussing this issue, we had many economists who were saying we should now look at a $10 trillion economy, though we haven't even come to the $5 trillion stage yet. But that is the vision I think we need to go to. We have to become a strong economic power. And while becoming a strong economic military power, we have to ensure that we do not lose the military edge. Because if we lose the military edge, I think we're going to get back to the stage where other people can colonize us. Frank.
Absolutely. And that's something that we have to avoid at all stages or in any way. So let's look at another aspect that the general was talking about. Professor, let's build on that particular aspect about energy security now and how, as we are heading into Atmanirbharta, as we are heading into being fully self-reliant, how we need to be fully self-reliant as far as energy security is concerned as well. And do you believe that, tying up with China, do you believe that, associations like the ISA will go a great way in ensuring we do that?
Thanks, Frank. Frank, I think when you talk of economic self-sufficiency and Atmanirbhar Bharat and others, sort of goes to the very first question that you asked Ambassador Prakash in terms of what is happening. And a fundamental fact of today's world order is that we are reassessing some of the older assumptions with which we have perhaps grown with over the last 2 decades. And economic globalization, for example, is part of that. We are seeing how, increasingly domestic economic policy is being linked to foreign policy. We see that in the statements that are emanating from democratic establishment in Washington, saying that the first priority is going to be middle class Americans for them. So clearly something is changing in the way we are looking at the economic order. We are looking at the assumptions underpinning that economic order, and therefore a lot of the things that we have to do, or a country like India will have to adjust to, will be quite different from the one that we are so used to now in the 1990s, since the 1990s. So the challenge is, how do we make sure that that this transition is as seamless as possible and without the accompanying hiccups that usually are associated with this kind of a transition. And there, I think in some ways, COVID-19 has impacted us and taught us lessons. Prime Minister said this very early on, that his most important lesson for India at the moment is self-sufficiency, self-reliance in critical areas. We saw that in terms of what perhaps it does to pharmaceuticals, but it has been now expanded. And in the context of China conflict, we are looking at how we can make the economic relationship with China reciprocal and protected in some critical areas. So I think the question, I think, for a lot of those who look at it and to think about the global order is that a number of those assumptions have to be relooked at. And a number of those assumptions have to be recalibrated now to the contemporary realities that we face, both in terms of the strategic parameters that we are looking at, as well as the larger economic frameworks that we have grown used to. Now, energy is one area where this is not possible in the short term. Energy is one area where diversification is going to be the norm, where India has been trying to diversify to the best extent possible. And we are looking at, for example, the role that America has now is coming to play in our energy matrix. But the challenge, again, there is going to be that energy security is linked with so many other issues: maritime security, bilateral partnerships, strategic relationships, what happens in the Gulf between various religious denominations, what happens to the larger architecture of security in the Middle East. So in some ways, India's footprint, as it expands, as it extends beyond its immediate periphery, which is something that India has been trying to do for a while, we'll have to balance this out. To what extent do we want to be there in the Middle East with the kind of footprint that we have been having for the last few years? I mean, we have been talking of that we have excellent relationships with countries like the Gulf states and Israel and Iran, which are often at at loggerheads with each other. But we have managed to do that much better than, say, some other countries. But then there is also the question of rising Chinese influence and waning American influence. How do we square that circle? That as a relationship with China becomes much more antagonistic, and it is likely to become even more antagonistic going forward, then how do we balance those that relationship in say a particular theater like West Asia or Middle East? So I think the questions that India will be asking, and a lot of the other countries are asking at this particular point, is that do we need new frameworks? Do we need new approaches to engage with these questions, because some of the older assumptions are no longer working, or will no longer be working very, very quickly if the present trends are anything to go by. So therefore, I think in terms of the larger economic, trade, energy relationships, completely new engagement will be needed with not only the fundamental concepts, but also in terms of our empirical partnerships that we have developed and how those partnerships evolve, given, as we were discussing early on, this is a time of great flux in great power relationships, in geopolitics, and in the larger strategic architecture of the global order.
Absolutely, absolutely. Ambassador, looking at the larger perspective of the global order, let's also take a look at what exactly is happening between some of these major powers. Reluctant, but partners nonetheless are Russia and China, because of everything that has happened, since Crimean annexation. There is also a massive build up on the Ukrainian border as well, and that has not gone down too well as far as the Americans are concerned. So there's that equation between the US and Russia as well. And then it seems like the change of guard in the United States has not changed too many things as far as US foreign policy towards Iran and towards China are concerned. So there's that whole equation as well. So how would you look at all of this?
Very, very pertinent points. As far as Russia is concerned, I, for one, believe that the Western world in general and the US in particular should review its stand. Russia may not be the superpower that it was used to be, but it's a country with the largest amount of natural resources. And to keep a country like Russia down is difficult. It's much better to co-opt Russia into the geopolitical matrix than push them into the tighter embrace with China. So if a modus vivendi can be found between the US, the Western world and Russia, I think it will help in peace and stability in the world. That is what. As far as China is concerned, the Biden administration started off with a little more nuanced approach. They said that they will protect their interests, etc., but also said something very interesting, that if it is in the American interest, they will also engage with China. So there was an olive branch, so to say, extended. I still feel that there is a bit of shadow boxing going on. And China also, after trying out their theatrics, after muscle flexing, they will try to come around and make peace with the US, even if it's a tactical peace. But the US under Biden administration does not want to have a break with China. If for that matter, no country wants to sever relations with China. They only want China to follow the rule of law, follow the code of conduct in dealing with each other. So they will try, but they also know that China is threatening the US supremacy and wants to dethrone the US as the preeminent power. So there will be contestation, and there is a possibility still of some kind of an understanding. On Iran, I think the Biden administration has already indicated a willingness to engage with Iran, and which will be opposed by Saudi Arabia. We know that the administration has changed its tune on Saudi Arabia, and they are trying to engage with Iran. Iran has realized that at the end of the day, there is only one country that matters. In the JCPOA, Europe, Russia, etc., nobody could contribute or do much. Came Trump and everything was turned on its head. So they will try to extract some kind of a deal. They will want the sanctions to be lifted. I still see hope in some kind of a deal or an arrangement being worked out, or a JCPOA 2 or a variant thereof. But one game changer could be a Shia bomb. Because if in the meantime, as they are negotiating, already Rouhani has said that they will enrich uranium to the extent of 60%. If they manage to fabricate even a crude Shia bomb, I think it will be a game changer.
Right. General, let me bring you in now. Considering all that is happening, and like the ambassador has very rightly pointed out, what should our strategy be really as far as dealing with China? Because there is no doubt that China poses the biggest challenge to us, because we share a border with China, unlike the others who are far, of course, Russia too, but to an extent, they too have problems, but India has bigger problems with China. So how do we deal with Russia? How do we deal with that equation between Russia and China? And then, of course, bringing in the United States as well into the picture.
One thing, Frank, which Indian foreign policy has done under the present dispensation is dehyphenating our dealing with different countries. So when we deal with Russia, it is independent of how we deal with the United States. And when we deal with the United States, it's independent of how we deal with China. So the real problem really is that the other countries, like when we notice what Russia did recently, when their foreign minister, Mr. Lavrov, came from India, then he went straight to Islamabad, and he made certain statements there. Now, in a sense, he was hyphenating India and Pakistan, which is something which Indian foreign policy, or we have specifically told them not to do. Now, this increasingly shows that Russia is coming under the influence of China. This is one point. Otherwise, they wouldn't have gone around this path, including the advice which Lavrov was giving as far as the Quad and the Indo-Pacific is concerned. He was really talking the Chinese language. So they have started playing second fiddle to China, which is an increasing reality. This is one. Now, what should India do? I don't think it is possible for India to assume that we will be able to settle the border problem. It is not going to be settled. At least it is not going to be settled on India's terms, right? What we can do is to ensure that it is not settled on Chinese terms either. It cannot be unilateral. For that, the military presence which is there as of now is appropriate. And I think it is this military presence which is averting a war. I have always maintained that our ability to win a conflict, a limited conflict in the Himalayas, is the best way to avert that particular conflict. And as I had made my remarks in the earlier in my earlier statement, the key really lies in the air over the Tibetan plateau. The second aspect which will have to come in as far as this is concerned is our own cyber capability and how best we can address it, because the future conflict with China will start really in the cyber domain and it will be spread all across India. So what do we do? One, I think the Quad is a very good idea because, in my view, it's a very good idea because any pressure which is there on the northern borders can be deflected by our own movements on the Malacca Straits. China is vulnerable. Number two, the ambassador made a remark about Taiwan. I have absolutely no doubt that when China feels they can take Taiwan, they will take it, right? They will use military force. Now, if they get away with it, the balance of power has changed, and we can assume that China has become the numero uno in world affairs. But they will be contested. And if we don't contest, then we are looking at a different world order where China will be the hegemon and they will dictate policies which will be far worse than what the present world order is. So I think that is something which we need to be very careful about. There are two major challenges for India. One is the challenge of terrorism, which is emanating from Pakistan, which is really state-sponsored terrorism. And what is going to happen now when the drawdown of American troops takes place from Afghanistan? Now, on the first aspect, as far as terrorism from Pakistan is concerned, I think Pakistan is no longer a major conventional threat to India, but it remains a very strong subconventional threat in the terms of spreading terrorism. Now, when we got rid of article or the provisions of 370, it really stumped both the Chinese and the Pakistanis as far as how to handle Kashmir is concerned. And I think that was the most important public policy initiative which was taken to ensure that peace reverts to the state of Jammu and Kashmir. So we are well on that path, and I think the Pakistani ability to create violence has diminished considerably. But what is going to happen in Afghanistan? And I just try to give my views very, very quickly. I think the Afghan security forces are in a position to take on the Taliban post an American withdrawal. But that will depend on the funding of these security forces, which requires about $3 billion US per year. And if that funding is made available, then I think we are likely to see a maintenance of the status quo. Minus that funding, at some point of time, the Taliban will take over the government. It will be, we will get back to the 90s, and I can predict right now, we are looking at civil war. That is not going to be to the benefit either of China or of Pakistan, because then we will see a realignment of forces, and you will find Iran, Russia, and India coming to the support of what was then the earlier Northern Alliance, because none of us want that element of terrorism to spread from Afghanistan. On the Arab world, I think what India will have to do and maintain is to ensure that peace is maintained in the Gulf. Now, I'm very chary about the Iranians developing a nuclear device. I am absolutely confident, and I say this with great, with great
confidence.
with a lot of, if the Israelis feel or they are convinced that the bomb is there, they will attack that facility. I've got no doubts about it. They will attack that facility. I'm making a positive statement. because for Israel, this is an existential threat. So I think it would be in the interest of all world powers to ensure that Iran does not get a nuclear device or the Shia bomb, as the ambassador said, because that will lead to war. And the Israelis have made no bones about it. They will go ahead. They will not need either sanction from the US or from the European Union or any other country. It will be a unilateral action. And I think that will set off an adverse situation in the Gulf, which will affect India's energy security. So these are
Sure.
the things which I think which we need to be conscious of, because in my initial remarks I had said, in my own view, our prime concern is to ensure energy security, because only based on that will everything else come up. Frank.
Absolutely, absolutely. Points taken, General. Let me take the discussion forward and go to the professor now. Professor, as far as dealing with China is concerned, do you believe at some level we need to bring in, the other two panelists have already spoken about Taiwan. What should our focus and what should we be saying about Taiwan? That is one. Should we bring up issues like Xinjiang and Tibet and the Dalai Lama? What should our focus be? Unmute, please.
Frank, if the present trajectory continues insofar as the Sino-Indian relations are concerned, then I have no doubt that this will, this opens up the Pandora's box, and I think there'll be all sorts of issues, and everything should be on the table. I have no hesitation in saying that. Because clearly, the older framework of Sino-Indian relationship is not working. Now, Ambassador Prakash was quoting Ambassador Menon. If someone of Mr. Menon's experience is writing something like this, then we have to take cognizance of the fact that I think the strategic community in India is almost in one place on the question of China, that this is not going to be a positive relationship. This is going to be a very, very challenging relationship. And fortunately, or I think unfortunately, we have not been able to find a right mix of policy responses. I mean, this is also something that we should have been doing. We should have done much better and I think there is some amount of responsibility that previous administrations, including this one in its first initial years, should take, because the challenge, the China challenge has been the most important challenge for a while now. While we can see the kind of the tone and tenor of the challenge has changed, what is striking is that if you look at some of the previous records, there was no real doubt about this challenge presenting itself in the way and shape and form that it has created. So now I think the question is, if the older template where we were trying to say, look, we will keep on talking about border, but we will also do other things, and we will also maintain certain kind of a relationship at the highest levels, and we will that model has broken down completely. And now our foreign minister, our officials are openly saying that border is at the heart of it. Unless border is resolved, we really can't expect the relationship to move forward. So now, if that is the case, and the Chinese do not seem very willing to move on the border question, then I think everything from Taiwan to Tibet to other issues that India has really not touched upon will be on the table, because I think the issue would be reciprocity. Even on trade now, we are saying that, well, it has to be reciprocal in nature. You really can't have the kind of trade relationship in the past, and this is not simply India but the rest of the world asking China to do certain things which China is not willing to do, and therefore the rest of the world has to respond in certain manner, including India. So whether you cut China off from certain critical sectors, whether you make it very clear to the Chinese that certain things will not be done unless Chinese do certain things, I think those are the questions of nitty-gritty. But the larger strategic picture remains that if the relationship is moving in the direction that it is going right now, and there is little hope that the relationship would eventually evolve, then I think the challenge would be that this relationship would that various stakeholders in this relationship would bring their own grievances to the table, and those grievances would become central issues in any sort of engagement. Now, what we can do, and what I think has been highlighted by others, is to build relationships, is to build partnerships, is to give us certain leverage, whether it is by Quad or whether it is by Quad plus engagements, whether it is engaging with Taiwan more substantively, whether it is by expanding our footprint in the Indo-Pacific and wider maritime periphery on a more substantive basis. I think those are being done, those will be done, and I don't think, irrespective of what China does, the Indian establishment will reconsider them. So I think that the larger issue therefore becomes is that in this new environment, how do we find a modus vivendi with the Chinese? How do we find that, here is a country which is a neighbor, here is a country with whom India has so many challenges, here is a country with whom the larger paradigm, the former, the initial paradigm that we had, the previous paradigm that we had created is not really working. So how do we find a new paradigm? And I think that's something that India will have to engage substantively on, both even as it builds its domestic capabilities, both military, economic, as well as political, and as it expands its external partnerships, recognizing fully well that at the end of the day, India will have to fight its own battles. At the end of the day, when it comes to the crunch, India will have to stand up on its own. And I think that is a challenge that India and many other countries perhaps are facing at the same time.
Absolutely. Time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward considering the present global equation, starting first with you, Ambassador.
As far as I'm concerned, just 2 or 3 points. One, we need to we should compare ourselves with ourselves, that is fine. But we need to get into the mode of comparing ourselves with our competitors. I'm talking here on the economic front, because it is economy, which is at the base of anything that we do, whether it is security, whether defense, whether it's our standing. And we have to get our economic act right. We have to be a part of the regional global chains. We have to get free trade agreements, and we have to focus very strongly on economy. That is one. And secondly, we need a conflict-free environment for the next 20 years. And I would wish, if it is possible, to tactically, strategically avoid getting into any conflict. And I guess that these are the two biggest challenges. The other things we have discussed, but it is going to be a difficult task, a difficult journey, except that I am very confident that given India's strength, given India's resilience, we are capable of doing that. Frank?
Right. General?
Right, Frank. The economy is a given. I won't go further into it. I think what we also need to do along with the economy is, to try to gain the technological edge. We have the brain power, but I think we need the policies to really give an impetus to that. There are two more points which I think India needs to do. One, I think internal cohesion within the country is going to be very important, because I am seeing a trend which is happening over the past few years of outside forces in cahoots with internal forces trying to create disturbances. And it is a deliberate it is a deliberate attempt to put India down. So how the nation gets together to counter these forces is going to be an important challenge. Lastly, I think we need to build up our alliances. Today, it is a changing world order. It is a different world altogether. So when we are looking at what earlier was our policy of non-alignment, it is not going to work in that manner. We can still be independent of major power blocks, but I think we have to be a power block on its own right as India, right? Get our alliances or our cooperation with other countries right, so that we can preserve our own culture, our own way of life, and not succumb to pressure being imposed upon us by countries such as China. Frank.
Absolutely. And Professor, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Frank, I think the next few years, the next decade, perhaps, will be a decade of great fragmentation, and that is a challenge that Indian foreign policy, Indian diplomacy will have to weather, because fragmentation of the global political order, fragmentation of the institutional order, and fragmentation of the normative order. And I think that with that fragmentation comes conflicts. It may or may not result in violence. It may or may not result in wars. But I think certainly a larger competitive conflictual environment, if it pervades around India, India cannot be left unmoved by that. And therefore, Indian diplomacy will have to figure that into its calculations, that certain kind of environment where major powers got along with each other, where with all their faults, international institutions were working. With all their challenges, normative order existed, which could be relied upon. We are looking at a world which is transcending that environment, and therefore, which I think Ambassador Prakash earlier described as global disorder. In that global disorder, Indian foreign policy will have to try to find some order. And that's a real challenge for, I think, Indian foreign policy and diplomacy, like for other foreign policies and diplomacy. And I think that's the role that good diplomats always are trained to do. So I'm sure Indian diplomats will rise to the occasion. But the challenge, I think, conceptually, as a scholar, as someone who studies and studies and teaches this, one sees the beginning of almost a new era in terms of the conceptual framework that is available. And perhaps that is what is needed to a lot of the students and youngsters who are trying to think of this world, that we almost will need to relook at our assumptions and unlearn some of the things that we have learned in the last 2 or 3 decades, to map out the challenges and to also prescribe, if needed, certain kinds of policy prescriptions.
All right, gentlemen, we'll have to leave it at that. Thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. What's coming out of this discussion is that there is a clear restructuring of the world order. Things are not what they used to be a few decades ago. The challenge from China is real, and democracies around the world are concerned. It is good for us to be associated with like-minded countries through groupings like the Quad, but we have to safeguard our own interests. India has emerged on the global stage with its diplomacy. We, however, have to do much more. If we can get our act together on the economic front, we too can be a power to reckon with in the years to come. Once again, thank you for your continued support. For those of you who haven't already subscribed, please subscribe, hit the bell icon, and then all notifications. Do follow our social media handles for all the latest updates, and you can also subscribe to our newsletter for some incisive content. The Bharata First team is running a daily quiz. The winner will get to interview me in a program called Hot Seat, and the details are in the description of this video. There is also a contribution link for those of you who would like to come forward and contribute to keep this content alive. A small contribution will go a long way in ensuring that we continue to bring this content to you. That's it from me. See you again next time.